Thank you. Just a quick question. Is it okay if I just jump around all over the place here? Yes. That was okay, I'm just going to do that. Okay, but then the light and stuff. I'm actually really pleased to be here. I love Toronto, I love Canada, and it's my, I don't know, 4th or 5th time, and I always explore something new, the coffee shops and stuff. And I really want to thank Sean and Jacqueline and the entire team for actually bringing me over. Thank you so much, it's been wonderful. Thank you. Now, I come with peace, but you will see a lot of cats today. I did my research, and I know that most of you don't like cats. I know that, right? And don't like red either. Now, here's a very scientific survey. How many of you would consider yourselves to be cat people? Okay. Who is a dog person? Yeah, so we have on average, based on my very scientific survey, there are approximately 60% of people who are dog people, and 30 maybe who are cat people, and everybody else just doesn't care. But we kind of made a decision to move with cats, and there is no way back, so sorry about that. But before I start, a couple of things. Well, yes, my name is Vitaly, and yes, I was born in Belarus and then moved to Germany. Long story, was all around the place. This is how I used to look like back in the day, but things do change over time, apparently. This is the little website that I co-created like 11 years ago now, and it's going to look like this very soon. And it's been a very long process. It's been a very long journey for us to move here. And what I want to do today is kind of share some of the insights from different perspectives for designers and for developers about the work that we did and why. And it's not like a product placement. It's more really about the lessons we learned along the way. And it's kind of specifically, it's about the things that I thought I wish I'd known earlier, right? And where I lost a lot of time on this. And I want to kind of look into design and the front-end side first. And when I talk about design, obviously we will be talking about usability in a second, but I want to focus specifically on visual design and kind of step away a little bit, because it's a closing talk of the day, to kind of look into how we design today. What does it actually mean in terms of visual design? We talk a lot about personality, but we also talk a lot about the lack of personality. Now, you must have found, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 articles on Medium talking about how generic everything has become, right? We all design boxy layouts. They all look the same. All the websites look the same. And it has a very good reason. And the reason for it is the design process is weird and complicated because it involves... Okay, that doesn't work as expected, because it involves people and organizations and systems which often are weird and complicated. And I'm not sure if it's correct for you, but it's totally correct in Germany on projects that I work on as a consultant. And very often managers tend to think very interesting, and they tend to have a very interesting view of what the creative process looks like. And I'm talking about creative. I don't talk specifically about the designers, but also developers being creative, because we are all creatives here. So we start somewhere, this is the view, and go, and we iterate and iterate and iterate and iterate and iterate and iterate until at some point we hit the finish line and we're done. Now, to me, it looks very different, because when we design, when we develop, when we do anything in this industry, it feels like we're always exploring. There is always a starting point, but we also go ahead and we try to figure out what exactly the solution is going to be. And as we do that, eventually we hit this dead end when we have to recover and move forward. And this is where we're losing time. And this is why we tend to rely on things that used to work in the past. Makes perfect sense, right? How many of you have seen this before? Which one of these 2 possible websites are you currently designing? Because, there are only 2. There is nothing else. Well, sometimes the only difference is that there is a carousel on the top or on the bottom. But beyond that, it's all the same anyway, right? And I'm wondering that maybe the reason for it is not because we're lazy. We know what we're doing. We're smart people here in the room. But the problem is we've kind of forgotten the big picture maybe at times. How many of you had this conversation with your manager or your colleague? Like, so what's it going to be? Like border radius 15 pixels or 11 pixels? Well, let's make it 15. And then 2 weeks later, well, let's make it 12. Right? And then maybe 2 weeks later, let's make it 13. Right? These kind of conversations happen quite a lot, and they may be totally unnecessary. Do they bring us forward? I mean, this has been happening for a long time. We've been improving and refining on this macroscopic level for such a long time. But maybe sometimes it's really important to break out of this. Because we have these rules, right? We have these fantastic rules about things we're supposed to do, the best practices. And I am advocating for best practices, but sometimes it's really critical to break out of them. Now, how many of you have heard this before? You should not define the line height in pixels. That's not cool, right? Nobody should do that. You should not base the breakpoints on device sizes. That's not cool. Don't do that. You should not take the name of the Lord, performance, in vain, right? You don't do that. Performance matters. So what does it leave us with as creatives? Well, we have projects, right? So we end up with having a project, and somebody comes to us and gives us some content, often lorem ipsum, but often some content. And we have this layout we're creating. So we create a new canvas, and then we start putting content inside. But then somebody comes to us and tells us, no. This is not okay. You should not start with desktop first. You should start mobile first, right? Because this is the best practice. Everybody should be designing mobile first. And you say, all right, so I know what to do. Have found this magical placement with the magical icon that's universally understood, right? And I'm going to put navigation in there. And then somebody comes to you and tells you, no. That's not how it works. Do not use a hamburger icon. That's not cool. If you have something important to display, display it. If you have an important call to action button, you will not go ahead and hide it behind the hamburger icon, which makes sense. So you go ahead and go back and say, all right, so I'm going to put all these navigation items in here, and so they're clearly visible, but you still have this content that you have to organize. So how are you going to organize it? Well, you put it under your navigation, right? But then somebody comes to you and tells you, no. This is not how it works. Don't put important stuff below the fold. And I say, well, I know exactly what to do to keep it above the fold, right? There is a fantastic pattern that everybody is familiar with. No. So as a result, this becomes our creative process, right? And it's actually very, very sad because we can build things that are really quite remarkable. This is an example from a print magazine, right? And, it's a very strong, heavily typographic layout, and it looks pretty cool, right? But then when translated or templated into the web, it becomes this, right? So there is a lot lost between this screenshot and the previous screenshot, right? So that makes me a bit sad, and I'm just wondering why is that and how we can actually make it better. So maybe we can set up a framework to really embed the personality that everybody wants to embed in the first place. Now, a couple of months ago, I attended this talk by Mogens Møller, which is a Danish designer. He's like 18 or 19 years old. And he said a couple of things that really struck with me for a while, and they actually defined a lot of how we were working on the process, on the project as well. And I keep returning back to this quote quite a lot. He said, if we want to stand out today, because everybody is pretty great out there, to outperform our competitors, we need to delight customers with a remarkable design and a unique, charming personality. I don't like the word delight, but we'll talk about it later. Be slow and mindful with an unprecedented attention to detail. Right? Now, when I hear unprecedented, I hear expensive and time-consuming, right? So this is not quite what I wanted, but something he continued then really made sense. We should under-promise and over-deliver. Capture attention and guide it skillfully. On the web today, it all boils down to one single thing, be it easy interfaces, web applications, React, whatever you want to do. Outstanding storytelling to great art direction. Now, I was surprised. When you're building websites today or applications today, do you think about art direction in your code? What does it even mean, right? Do you think about art direction in design, or is it mostly templating, just putting things inside? When I think about storytelling, I think about this, and maybe this, but definitely not this, right? This one is definitely not storytelling. There is no connection, maybe there is a story, but I don't feel connected to that story. But I do feel connected to this story a lot. I asked myself a while back, why is it, and I'm not affiliated with MailChimp in any way, but I asked myself, why is it that I find it very easy to move away from Uber to Lyft or to anything else? Let's say if there was a new service, which was maybe on average like 20 cents cheaper, I probably would jump right away. But moving away from MailChimp is very, very hard for me. Somebody needs to give me money, so I move away from MailChimp, right? This is kind of the sort of connection I have. And I guess this is the reason for it is not just the chimp. It's kind of the story and everything that's surrounding it. So they create, for example, these color books, right, for children. And they just distribute them on the streets for free to everybody to use, right? Do you see any button or anything saying www.mailchimp.com or whatever it does? They just create this stuff. Hi, I'm Freddy. I would go, oh, I can't read from here. It's fun to be me. Is it fun to be you? Now, how can you reply to that question in a negative way? No, I don't like me. I find myself horrible, right? This is not how it works. And they continue, and it's like, it's very nice, and I know, I'm not stupid, I get it, it's marketing, but it's a really good marketing. I would love more marketing on the web that looks like this, right? Or even the last one here, I love being me, do you love being you? Right? So storytelling through art direction. Now, why is it important? How can we translate this to the lessons we learned and to your projects as well? Now, here's a nice story. Tijuana Flats is a network or chain of Mexican restaurants in the US, and they have very specific branding. This is what they look like inside if you walk in. You might like it, you might hate it, but this is the language that they're speaking. This is the style that they have, right? And those buildings, those paintings, or the graffiti, are really, really huge. Look at the people down there, right? This is them, and this is the freaking painting. That's really huge. And every couple of months or so, they would hire new people to come in, graffiti artists, and redesign those walls. So that's a lot of work. And of course, this style is also reflected in their restaurant menus. And it should be reflected in their website as well, right? And actually it is, right? Again, you might like it, you might hate it, but this does reflect their voice. Now, think about how you would design this, build the navigation on the top in HTML, CSS. Okay, still thinking? All right, good luck with that. But they decided to make a big move and move towards the best practices, flat design, performance, everything that we're talking about, moving away from this to this. I don't know about you, but I feel like a lot of stuff has been lost in this transition because it's, better to design something that's more modern these days. And I would love to see more stuff like this instead. Right? This is a Bloomberg Business Week Design Conference website. It was designed 2016. It uses Marquee. When was the last time you used Marquee? Anybody? No? Okay. So, it goes against everything that we know of, right? Because it wants to be seen maybe slightly differently. Maybe there is a time and place for anything, even when it means kind of breaking out of the rules. They, of course, exaggerate, and not everybody can pull it off. I cannot see an online banking application doing this, obviously, right? But that served its purpose. It may be not designed well, but it's designed well enough to sell all the tickets they had at a given time. And for Bloomberg, it was a really big deal because they were seen as just one of the many companies that are, just one of the many. So they hired a group of designers who were able to do whatever they wanted. And they created pretty much everything they ever wanted, right? They went all the way, partly even overboard, to create even things like this. Partly inaccessible, unfortunately. The stuff should still be accessible, but it looks different. So all of a sudden, they're seen as this kid around the corner, that creative design kid around the corner. And I'm not saying that we should all be creating this. This is a bit weird, and I hope you appreciate the hover effect that they use on the cursor. Right? And I'm not saying that you should do that to your customers. Please don't. But you could use a similar idea in a more subtle way. This is exactly the same idea being applied slightly differently. Right? We can move things around, and of course, a museum conference website, or a museum exhibition, or museum website, or gallery can pull it off. Why not? And so I asked myself, so what does it mean for us? How can we do this? Right? And basically, it all boils down to one thing. You pick one little thing, one subtle little thing that will define your identity, will be your signature, and you use it consistently. And even if you don't have a good product to sell, you can still wrap a story around it. Hans Brinker Hotel is a great example of this. Now, Hans Brinker is a hotel in Amsterdam. It's not a good hotel, okay? So if you're not a good hotel, you should not be expecting to sell many rooms, right? So they had problems, so they didn't know what to do because they were literally not selling enough rooms. So let me just pause here for a second. So they had to make a choice. So what do? Do we, invest more money into the hotel? I will totally overrun today, I know that. Or should we just kill the entire idea and just move on to something else in our life? Now, both ideas were not acceptable, so they thought about the third. They said, well, if we can't be the best hotel in the world, maybe we can be the worst hotel in the world. That's another way of seeing it, right? So, of course, they need to create a website that would be reflecting this purpose. So they hired a professional designer who was paid one burrito for it. And it was, in fact, a professional comedian who would come up with the copywriting and the structure and the design for the entire thing, which was supposed to be, again, go against everything that we always knew of, right? So obviously everything is kind of totally off. The typography is strange. There are so many things that are just ridiculous in a way. But again, it serves its purpose. In that regard, it's a very good design, right? And they even hired specifically an amateur photographer, because the professional photographer would not be able to create the photos that they needed, right? So this goes all the way overboard. And guess what? They're expanding to Lisbon because they're booked 2 months or so in advance. Everybody wants to have the craziest, horrible experience in the hotel experience, right? And you might think, well, not everybody can pull it off. And yes, not everybody can pull it off, but in many cases, we can try to play with this idea. Kind of, this is the power of storytelling at play here. The best thing is about to come on this side. Just be ready. You know how we talk about the like buttons? Don't put the like buttons. Well, I would say either don't put them or put 20 of them. Right? Nobody is stopping you from this, so you go ahead and do. And the other thing is, you know, we also talk about the pop-ups being horrible, like nobody should use pop-ups. This website, this hotel website, has the most amazing, remarkable, delightfully annoying pop-up I've seen in my life. It's so annoying, I love it. I just can't move away from this. It's just incredible. So maybe every single website should have it, or maybe not. But this is a part of the story because it fits nicely. Even some horrible, horrible component that we would never use can fit well in the story. This guy decided that it's a good idea to split himself into 3 parts. So every time you refresh the page, his background is going to change and just looks like this, right? This is his thing. This is his signature. You don't need to go overboard with fancy illustrations and stuff. One little thing, one little subtle detail that makes all the difference. It can also be animation. If you remove all the transitions and animation from the side, it will look exactly like everything else. But this little, I don't know how to call this effect, the swooshy animation that they have, this is the only thing that makes them different. Remove that, it will look exactly like everything else. Or sometimes the lack of transitions can help as well. Actually, slowing people down can work a lot as well. So we talk a lot about don't make people think. And with the redesign, we decided to really actively make people think, or actually slow them down. So here, we have this idea of, it's not our website obviously, where you just show things at a time, at their own pace, slowly one after another. And of course, sometimes it can also be just adding some idea. So you need to move between exhibition rooms. Well, maybe you could literally move between exhibition rooms as you move on the website, right? Why not? And even if it means, creating something crazy like this, which I never understood, but, there is a point in everything in life, I think, right? So I can watch it like all day long, but I don't know why. Yeah, that's just a miracle. Okay, so we should move on here, right? So this is kind of the idea that I was having for the last 2 years or so, and we wanted to kind of think about what our personality would be. And of course, when it comes to redesign, it all starts with a problem. And the problem in our case was ad blockers. Or not specifically ad blockers, but advertising. Now, who is using ad blockers? How many of you? Well, most of you. And in fact, I'm using one as well, and there are very, very good reasons for it. So please do keep using it if you have one. The main problem is not ad blockers. The main problem is advertising and the lack of infrastructure in advertising. Now, in our case, it was a really big deal. We were relying on advertising for many, many years. And at this point, like 1.5 years ago, we had 50% revenue decline yearly, advertising revenue decline. And we know from our stat that 66% of our users are using ad blockers. That's a big number, right? So basically, every single year throughout 5 years, last 5 years, we're losing half of our revenue, which brings us now to 1/16 of what we were earning 5 years ago. That was a big deal, and we had to fix it. Right? So, yeah, that's a bit too dramatic, I'm sorry. Yes. But advertising is going away, and I really don't believe in advertising, if I'm being very honest. So on the news site, you will not find much advertising at all. In fact, we had to kind of replace it with something that would be more meaningful. In our case, this is a new product that we're introducing, a membership, subscription with a couple of fancy features we don't have to talk about now. But it brought us to a very important decision. We had to find a way to present this new product or the entire set of products in a nice way, integrated in the current layout so it wouldn't look like ads, right? And it also meant that we wanted to kind of look into how we can use this opportunity to redefine the entire experience on the site. Now, from day one, we had to use whatever we had. We had WordPress, we had Ruby on Rails-based job board, we had a shop running on Shopify, previously Magento, and it was all not connected, so everybody had to have like one account on one platform. So if you couldn't just check out at once by adding a job posting and a book and a conference ticket, just didn't work. So we had to do something. And essentially, we needed to create a tool for the magazine, the CMS for 2,500 articles, comments engine, and the commerce platform, subscription service, a job board, and a membership login from scratch. That was no fun. But we just started and decided to give it a test and see how it goes. So we started working with Dan Moll on the design and Saraswati down on front end. Before that, we also had some exploration phase with Andrew Clark, and I'm showing all of them, all these people, because they are the ones, and not me presenting here, they're the ones making it all happen. I'm just writing a little bit of CSS here and there, right? A lot of CSS, right? And Ilya and Marco and Cat Illustrator, we have 56 freaking cats on the site. We'll talk about it later, right? But before that, we also had Matthias and others. Right? So this was a really big effort, which took us like 1.5 years. And what we started with was not necessarily wireframes. It was actually a text-based design, or text first, where I would sit down and I would create mockups like this. Now, I literally call it a mockup. I would just think about all the components we need and write down the copy, interface copy, that we were using in order to kind of communicate with the audience. And at first, as you can see, it was quite generic. There is nothing interesting in there. But even things like a light box, like micro interactions down the page, right, can still be prototyped in a way using just simple text in text editor. Well, not everybody will, it will not be the tool of everybody is in here, but it was a very convenient tool for me. And in fact, we started working around error messages first. Because if I can pick you up as a customer in the point when you feel disappointed or annoyed by something because something went wrong, and I can delight you or turn your experience into a positive one, now, then I did a good job. Maybe sometimes I do not need a visual design at all. So we started with the error messages first to define what our style or what our personality is going to be, and then move towards visual design. And as you can look into the error messages, they are kind of, well, they were fun to write. Took a lot of time to write those, and you'll find lots of them in there. If you look in the first one, it says, no cat is an island under first name. Now, when you forgot to type in the first name, you still have your placeholder. It would be just ridiculous to say, well, please, write in your first name. They know, people know that anyway. So instead, it says, well, no cat is an island. Well, you probably have a name, because all cats, even cats have names. It doesn't matter that much. We're still playing with it still. And then, of course, type. The error messages and the text was actually defining our choices, and the personality we defined as well. So we started looking at the typefaces, and we chose Elena for body copy, and we chose Mija for the headings. And I hate it. Just look at this A, right? I can't stand it. I really can't. But I think it's very important to kind of follow that personality that we designed in the beginning. I had a big decision to make. So when we asked around how people perceive Smashing, although I was perceiving Smashing as being this respected professional publication, this is not at all what was coming in user interviews. In user interviews, people were talking about personal, friendly, humble, quirky, right? And cats. Now, that was really surprising to me. Why cats? Well, because we have a couple of conferences throughout the year. We promote them, so people connect cats with us for some reason. And in fact, it doesn't matter where we look. There are cats, 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 cats everywhere. This is the one from Whistler, by the way, when we came there 3-4 years ago. So cats, for some reason. And I thought, okay, it's either try to push against what people want or just embrace it. Yes, we have many, 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 many cats on the site, right, as a result. But it was not only about cats. It was also about finding the right angle, and actually I literally mean it, because we wanted to define the signature not just by the cat, but actually by what smashing means even without visuals. So I started playing with layouts, very strange, sometimes interesting layouts, vertical headings, this kind of stuff. And very quickly we decided to move and find our signature defined through this tilting that we have on our logo. Now, it used to be 10.6 degrees. We did a big redesign. It's now 11 degrees. It might not be a big step for you. It's a very big step for us, right? But it had to be consistently used everywhere. Remember this tiny little subtle detail? This is everywhere on the site. Literally everything is tilted by 11 degrees, right? And if we look specifically, like in some parts, this is one of the style guides we developed, right? Literally everything had to be tilted by exactly 11 degrees, including, of course, the drop caps, right? And we played with this idea of communities have dimension, and this is coming from Dan Moll. They're quirky and soft, turned up to 11 degrees. Everything, 11 is a cool number. Everything 11 is great, right? And we started playing with this. And very quickly, we kind of came also to micro interactions like this. This was one of the first mock-ups we created for the magazine layout, right? And then we kept evolving it and evolving and evolving, and eventually we ended up with this design, right? And I know that most of you will find it weird and quirky and strange and totally strange, right? And more specifically, most of you will say, well, this picture on the top, right? Although it's Yuna, and Yuna is amazing. Where's Yuna? Okay, she's still amazing. Although it's Yuna, right? We give too much space to, to author. And I think it's still important because many people who write these articles, they don't get enough credit. They're written somewhere, the little like sentence or like two words somewhere in this font size small or so. But they deserve a bit more credit. So it's really important to highlight them because without them, this article wouldn't exist, right? But then literally everything is tilted, including the freaking form, for example. Because why not? But of course, it gets untilted once you tap or hover and start typing in, right? And many things are kind of playing with this idea of dimension coming from the left or from the right, or usually from the left, and kind of being exactly 11 degrees, right? And for the front page, again, it was we had many decisions of what we should do, what we shouldn't do, and then we ended up with this. And along the way, the one technique that I used a lot was slow motion. I would never kind of just do things and see, okay, it feels right or it feels not. I would always record it, and I'm using ScreenFlow for this. And I would just play tiny bit, one by one, looking exactly of what's happening on the screen while I'm navigating the site. So there is user flow, for example, buying a book or so. And I would play it all the way and looking into all the animations if everything is correctly. Like this is the level of detail that we actually wanted to put into this, right? And it also meant really, really paying attention to the UI. So we printed out, I literally, at least I did, printed out the entire checkout, and I was staring at these pages for 4 to 5 hours just to see if everything is perfectly clear. Now, can you spot one remarkable problem with this checkout, or with this page? This is the first page in the checkout. There's something that's so wrong, I couldn't sleep for a night because of this. Sorry? Okay, apparently there are many issues. But there is one that's been bugging me for quite some time, and that's this one. Now, this 7 right here, that's just not acceptable, right? That's just not how it works. And the reason why is because the entire thing is, of course, we're applying like small caps and font type feature settings on it, but because there is a hyphen coming after it, well, the end dash actually, coming after this, it's interpreted as a part of a word, so it's not small caps. So, of course, they had to have soft hyphen and sometimes even wrap the 7 around it. So I hope you appreciate the difference between this and this. Or not. Okay, that's fine. And of course, it was just a part of the story because, I'm exaggerating a little bit here. But you know how it is. You start up a new branch or so, and you want to add some new stuff. And you start going and you say, okay, so what am I going to do today? Well, conference page adjustments and minor type adjustments for speaker and talks. And you start more cat illustrations. Cat with dog outfit. Adding new cat illustrations. Horizontal lines for meow content. And, oh yes, we went all the way with CSS as well. So if you look into HTML at some point, I'm not sure if it's in master yet, I found out that it's very difficult to use emoji in CSS and HTML because it's difficult for debugging. That's number one. And second, there are 7 or 8 cat emoji And they'd interpreted or represented differently on different platforms. So teams, remote teams, might have issues working with them. So, no. But for the hamburger icon, totally going with this. Right? That's totally cool. Why not? It makes perfect sense. Which kind of brings us to the front-end side of things. Right? So design was one thing, but once you had a design, we had to figure out how we're going to build it. Now, we had to look in the browsers first. And we had a very privileged and nice position to be in, I must admit. So if we look at the stats, we had the good ones. Right? So, you know, it's quite comfortable. I don't think that everybody in the room has stats like this. But of course, we need to talk about the devil. Or the devil. Or not mobile, by the way. Mobile's not the devil. Now, it was pretty good, I have to admit. No problems there. Except this is not entirely true, because there is one person who comes to the site once every 2 years with the user agent being Internet Explorer 666. Which totally skews my data and statistics and pie charts when I look at it throughout the year. But I do appreciate the irony. If you are one of these people, like that person, please come to me, we need to talk. Yes. But when I started building, we kind of followed this pyramid, which was actually introduced by Patty Toland from Filament Group, when she was talking about components based on this level, like very much like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where we have the speed first that we need to take care of. It has to be accessible. Then we need to take care of scale, of how it behaves in responsive fashion. And on top of that, we're adding this personality, if you like. We're adding animations and transitions and this 11 degrees and stuff like this. That is very important as we were building it. At the same time, we had to make a decision about frameworks. And we decided not to use frameworks at first. We looked into options. I asked just a while back how many people are actually using jQuery in production these days. And 1.5 years ago, it was way more. And we decided not to use jQuery for sure. Right? But at least like 40% is still much better than we used to have, like 100%. But again, jQuery has its place, but I don't think it's necessary anymore. And the reason why we wanted to kind of stay small and not use big frameworks, and I know jQuery is not a framework, but we didn't want to use big libraries either. Well, when we use a small library, it feels like there are a simple series of steps until we get to where we want to go. But when we're using frameworks, big frameworks, there are so many unknowns, it's very difficult to find your way to get where you want. And so instead of React, we decided to use Preact. And it was very comfortable until a point when we realized, well, we need to write a lot of custom stuff for Preact now. Right? But we're still happy that we actually made this decision. Another decision we made was to try to use as little media queries as possible. Now, you might ask yourself, what now? What did media queries do now? Right? What's wrong with media queries? Well, there is nothing wrong with media queries, except maintenance can be a big deal. Now, this is a slide from Mike Rittenmiller from Australia, and he's talking about the spectrum of experiences. And specifically, when you're getting mock-ups from a designer, you have let's say, a large desktop view, and you have maybe a tablet view or mobile view. But the problem is you always have to kind of interpolate between these two states. And this is where mistakes happen. So if you look on the side here, right, so you have this green areas, which are kind of the perfect, that's exactly what a designer intended to do. But then you have the red area where things start breaking. Like, right, if you look into right here, right, it's kind of slightly off, and then the navigation is slightly off as well. So what do? You add a breakpoint. And then what do? You add a breakpoint. And the more perfectionist you are, the more breakpoints you're going to add. And that means that also over time, you will end up with quite a lot of stuff that you need to maintain. So for the layout, remember, we wanted to build this. We started looking into options of how we can build this without using too many media queries. And one of the ways we found, it's kind of connected to this idea. Imagine you have any component. It can be layout, it can be form, it could be anything. You want to just be able to change one setting somewhere, and it should scale up and down beautifully without you having to do too much. And more specifically, you want to have this kind of interpolation or function that defines this behavior. Now imagine that for every component, and a little bit of math is coming up, just be prepared. How many of you like math? How many of you don't like math? Who just doesn't like to raise hands in general? Okay, so if you imagine this is an idea, this is the idea we had. Imagine that for every single component, you could just define a function, a mathematical expression, in a way that would define the behavior of that component. Right? obviously using calc. And then it will just grow, it will just shrink as you want without having to add media queries at all. And more specifically, normally you don't want to have just uncontrolled growth. You want to have something like this, where you start growing in a certain way, and then you stop growing in a certain point. So more specifically, it will look like this, right? So at some point, it might get very small. So you want to start growing at some point, and then as you keep growing, you don't want to keep growing internally. You want to just stop growing at some point. So this is what we actually wanted to achieve. Now, if you want to do this, you can plot it on a graph, on a chart. Oops, sorry. We go back. You can plot it on a chart, and you're going to get this. So at the bottom, you find all the different viewports. On the y-axis, you find the font sizes for a heading, right? So if you want to use a modular scale, this is what you're going to end up with. If you want to describe this function, right, we need to use this, right? Who is still with me? Most of you. Oh, somebody's getting really interested. All right, this is getting interesting after all. Yes, but the problem is you can't solve it with CSS. This is just not possible. The only way you can do this is to kind of try to break down the entire thing into parts and then try to, connect the dots, if you like. But then you need to talk about slope, and you need to talk about the y-intercept and other things. Or if you want to be really, really specific, you can break it down into like 20, 30, 50 parts, and then you do this, right? But that's a bit too much, I would say. You don't need to go all the way. Because you can also use, again, a nice formula that Mike has come up with, which is this one. I mean, I'm sure that most of you, or many of you, have seen this before. It basically allows you to interpolate between two different values in a range of breakpoints. So you have a minimum font size. Right here for font size for a heading, you have a minimum, 16 pixels. Then you have a difference between minimum and maximum. So it starts at 16 pixels and it has to grow to 24. And then we have it multiplied by 100 VW minus 400 pixels. So it's area over which the item or the component can grow over. And then you have a difference between the maximum and the minimum, which is 800 minus 400. You don't need to memorize it, right? But the idea is you plug in 4 values and then you have interpolation, right? You plug in the minimum, plug in the maximum, and the screen sizes, and it can be 0 to 1,600 pixels if you want to, right? And you're done. And you can end up with a fluid modular scale, for example, like this, right? Where you have a regular modular scale, and then as you grow, everything just grows beautifully naturally without media queries altogether. You can use media queries, but you don't have to use media queries, right? And of course, for our good old friend IE8, we're going to send pixels down the line, right? And we thought maybe we can apply this everywhere. And when I mean everywhere, I mean, oh yes, everywhere. Everything could be calc-based. And we kind of pulled it off. Because even, if you build on top of this idea, you can say, well, even line height, exactly the same problem, solved in exactly the same way, have exactly the same formula, have exactly the same idea, like when you want to grow from 1.3 to 1.5, because on tight, on smaller screens, the smaller line height works better. Right? And on larger, you want to be at most 1.5. You plug it in the formula the same way, and you get this. And you're done. Right? Again, no need for media queries at all. And even more creative things like padding and margin and borders and image width and image height and everything in between can also be used in exactly the same way. Now, there are two considerations we have to keep in mind, though. Sometimes you want a fluid behavior by default, and sometimes you want to plug in a fluid behavior. Right? Now, if you want to kind of everything to be fluid, we just put font size with calc on the body, right? And then you define everything inside of your components and stuff in M units. Obviously, everything is going to refer to the body, right? Especially if you're using RAM, and then it's just going to scale up. That's a bit dangerous, right? Because literally everything is going to scale up. But you can achieve this in no time. Imagine you have a fixed area. For that fixed area, you're going to define the container in font size in pixels, and then, or in RAM units, well, in pixels, not RAM units. And then everything down the line is going to be defined in M units, right? And the other way around, this is a safer way of doing this, would be to say, okay, I'm going to keep font size 100%, and then I'm going to use this fluid container at the bottom, where you're creating a fluid container, and everything inside is defined in M's, right? And so you end up with a fluid part. It was inside of a fluently growing container inside of a just regular container. I actually wrote an article about this as well. So if you want to learn a bit more about this, no, this is an article to read. And we ended up with this, where if you look closely, every single thing, even the border around and the padding and the size of the search loop icon at the bottom upper right navigation, it all grows automatically using calc. Padding automatically using calc. Font size using calc. The tabs and the padding and the margin around them using calc. Obviously, we need to introduce some sort of media queries because the image, for example, is sometimes on the left, sometimes on the right. So we need to use Flexbox with order -1 to push it to the left or to the right. Right? But then as you keep going, it just all naturally grows. There are not many media queries involved, at least not for the article layout. And also, as you can see here, the font size also increases, right? And the padding and everything else as well. Right? So we end up with a lot of magic numbers. And these numbers are defined empirically, so you just play with the browser and see if it works or not. There is no really tool, at least not the one we could find, to find out how it works. And of course, we're tying it up with viewport width unit and viewport height units. And sometimes we'll use a lot of vertical media queries as well as horizontal media queries. Right? But not really, you don't really need media queries for this. Right? Now, that's one part of the story. Another part of the story was to figure out how we're going to optimize for performance. And how many of you are running HTTP2 already? Oh, at this point. Interesting. How many of you are thinking about moving to HTTP2? Who just wants to go home? Okay. I mean, that's interesting because actually HTTP2 is, well, for us it was a big deal. We moved to HTTP2 like 2 years ago, but we wanted to heavily optimize for HTTP2. Now, the reason why most of us cannot move to HTTP2 is because of HTTPS, but we can talk about workarounds later. So we asked ourselves, what would be the best way to deliver CSS? Or JavaScript. It doesn't matter if it's just CSS. Because in the past, we used to have this critical CSS, right? But all the way, long way before that, we would combine everything, minify everything, and put it in a link inside of the head. And then we moved away from this, right, towards something like this, more or less, where we would use critical CSS. Familiar with critical CSS? Above default CSS? Something of that kind, right? To optimize for performance, so the browser gets all the CSS they need to render the page. And then we moved away from this towards saying, okay, in HTTP2, requests are cheap. So we can just write down all of those CSS components that we have anyway, and we're going to benefit from HTTP2. Well, in our test, it turned out that the best way to do this for perceived performance is to break down, in fact, all your CSS modules into parts and keep them there, minify them, obviously, but then load them specifically before the component that you need kicks in. So when you start loading header, you just add the header CSS right before that. When you start loading, before you start loading article, you put article CSS in it. The same for comments and so on. And in fact, Jake wrote an article about this in February this year, I think, as well. And this is the difference, right? With progressive CSS and without. Now, with progressive CSS, the entire page loads sequentially, right? Without, you basically wait for blocking CSS. And it turned out to be even better than critical CSS. However, we're using both at this point. So for every single template, we have a specific critical, like critical homepage, critical category page, critical search, and so on. And so we're pushing them in front still. And it's going to happen only once because then the page is going to, the CSS file, full CSS file is going to be cached, right? So if you think about loading it, this might be actually an interesting way of doing this. Another important thing to keep in mind is how to deliver JavaScript. And for JavaScript, what we found out works best, this is the idea we had, we could say, well, okay, the same thing. In HTTP2, it's a good idea to just have many files because then you make use of parallelism. Well, yes, but the problem is you can't do the same with JavaScript because of one simple reason. You still need to package into 5 to 10 files because, first of all, the compression of a large package could benefit from dictionary reuse, whereas small separate packages will not, right? So if you have, let's say, 15 different JavaScript files and you load them all sequentially or so, then they cannot benefit from gzip because basically every single thing is going to be gzip. But if you actually put everything inside of like 5 or 10 files, then it's way better because everything is going to benefit from gzip. And secondly, browsers have not yet been optimized for such workflows. So we actually tried to say like, we have 100 CSS files, let's just put them all in like this, link ref, breadcrumbs.css, right? No, it wasn't as good as we expected. So in average, it's a good idea to stick to, let's say, 10 packages, at least in our experience, 10 packages for JavaScript. And 10 packages for CSS in terms of performance. In terms of performance, by the way, I was very surprised. Now, I need like 5 more minutes to explain a couple of things, but I was very surprised by results we were getting without any optimization. So we moved to a new stack, which I'm going to mention briefly, but I was surprised that quite quickly, without critical CSS and anything else, we're moving towards 0.6 seconds start render time. And don't get me wrong, we still have a progressive single-page application. Right? For single-page application, it's not quite normal to be loading under 0.7 seconds or so. But it was a very important decision because we moved away from what we were using in the past, which was WordPress and MySQL, JAMstack, towards JAMstack. How many of you have heard of JAMstack before? How many of you are still actively using it? Or not still, actively using it? Oh, a couple of people. Interesting. So for the others, I think it's really, really important thing that you need to consider today when we're designing a building, or mostly building, I guess. It also kind of calls for the serverless architecture that I will talk about in a second. So we're using WordPress from day one. And there is nothing wrong with WordPress. In the same way, there is nothing wrong with Shopify that we're using as a shop system. There is nothing wrong with the Ruby-based solution that we were using it for job board, right? But it didn't feel like it's like it's necessary anymore at this point. Now we moved away to a slightly different view on things. Now this is kind of the JavaScript API and markup architecture, also called JAMstack. It has to deal with the fact that many of us have changed our workflow over time. Now, how many of you are still using FTP for deployment? That's okay, it's a safe place. Okay, a couple of people, that's okay. It's really interesting that we moved away so rapidly and so quickly over the last 5 years or so to Git, right, from FTP. In the same way, how many of you are not using Gulp or Grunt or anything of that kind? That's okay, again, it's a safe place, I was told. All right. Well, many people are using it, but if you look into it, it's not like it's been around since 2005. It's actually quite recent and quite new. At the same time, we have tons of APIs available as well. If you need comments, you can plug and discuss. You need some kind of payment thing, you can use Stripe or PayPal for this. You need A/B testing, you can use Optimizely, and so on and so forth. So in the beginning, everything was quite simple and predictable. You have a browser and the server would kind of just return page, right? Then we thought, no, that's not good enough. Let's do some interactive clocks, right? Everything is better with an interactive clock. And then all of a sudden, you have a program running, and then you return something via program. And then we thought, no, we need a better architecture. We need to get proper architecture in place. So let's set up a database and stuff. So we set up a database, and PHP, and MySQL, and stuff. But then somebody said, no, wait. We need to improve performance. Let's do caching, all right? So we're going to do caching. And it's going to be a bit more interaction between here and there and forth. And then somebody said, no way. We need to get better. Let's use CDNs. I said, okay, so let's use CDNs. Okay? So there is a little bit of more work, right? And of course, because we're using a program, there's all security things that we need to care of and stuff. So I thought maybe we can rethink it. So we teamed up with Netlify. Just a couple of friends I had from 2011, actually. And I thought, well, we have this idea, and I thought, well, this is interesting. So instead of you don't have a server, full stop, you just have a CDN. So every single article that we have on the site is now, and it doesn't include just articles, it's also every single job posting, every single author, every single speaker, every single workshop, everything is stored as a markdown file. Then we're using a build tool to generate and add HTML and CSS to it. We pre-wrap this package, we send it straight to CDNs, and enrich it with some JavaScript on top. There is no server, right? So we just push it in the CDN, and then you're getting the files straight from a CDN, which means, we're using this wonderful Git workflow that we're used to anyway. So whenever we push a code, it always goes through the build tool, and then you have a continuous deployment, and then it goes straight to CDN without actually having any HTTP requests and any database requests at all, right? And this thing that we're building is not really a single-page application. It's kind of a bundle of single-page applications because we really wanted to make sure that the entire site works even without JavaScript. Now, we didn't get as far as we wanted, mostly because of the checkout, and you still have to do some kind of authorization and things like that. But we built a lot of custom APIs that needed to support it. So just to give you an idea, this new stack, this is at least what we are using, right? Well, actually, this is what we're using. We're using Hugo, and we're using Webpack, and then we pre-built the entire thing. As a CMS, we're using Netlify CMS. It's an open source CMS. It's not as good as WordPress, Of course not. But it does the job for us. We don't need more than that. We want to publish, we want to edit articles, we want to edit authors, we can do it all within one single point of a CMS. And in fact, if you look into it, let me just maybe quickly show you what it looks like so you get an idea. Oh, I don't see anything here. No, this is what it looks like. I can't move stuff. Oh, maybe here. Right. So you click on an article. So it's not as fancy as, I don't know what it displays. Oh, that's bad. Yeah, sometimes things happen. But basically, the interesting part is, if we look in here, you will find everything, like the job postings and the magazine articles and everything in one place, which is actually quite nice. Right? But then we actually really had to think about everything being progressively enhanced, and everything had to have a fallback. So for example, we're using live search, using Algolia, and it's remarkably fast. I just have to show it, because if you think that it cannot work, it will not be fast enough, well, it can be fast enough. So let me go to staging. Let me go to search. So when I type CSS, it doesn't get faster than this, I think, right? But the thing is, we had to provide some kind of fallback, right? So for live search, I mean, what do you do if you don't have JavaScript, or if you have a slow machine, or if you have a slow connection, right? So in that case, well, the fallback is always Google search. You just click on the button, you go to Google search, and if you have a JavaScript support, then you're going to use the search, right? For live comments, we're using just simple HTTP caching. We use service workers to cache the entire page and also the most important assets, which explains performance. In fact, if you want to take one thing from this, if you want to improve performance, service workers. That's it. Just put as many assets as you can into service workers, be it web fonts or other assets and stuff. PDF generation. We didn't want to create a new tool, so we spent a lot of time designing print style sheets. And I'm actually quite proud of the style sheets that we have. If you go into one, it took quite a lot of time, I must admit. But if you go into one of the articles, I'm totally overrunning. I'm so sorry. Where's my demo mouse? Here. I can't see anything. Right, so if you click on one of the articles, oh no. Right, for example, if you take Rachel's article and go into print style sheet, so this is what it looks like. And obviously, we also did the same thing for all the other things, like dashboard and orders and other stuff. So that was quite cool, because we just were too lazy to use any kind of PDF generation tool, to be honest. Unfortunately, the checkout doesn't quite work. But then this is, again, something that we're still working on. And for responsive images, we're using Cloudinary. For font loading, we use preload, and we load fonts asynchronously. But the fallback is always OS fonts, which means we have a huge stack, verbose stack, where we're targeting everything from Android, iOS, Segoy UI for Microsoft devices and stuff. Critical CSS deployment, okay, I think it's all covered so far. So the results, I was very amazed. Not because I want to show off, but I was really amazed. If you just move to Netlify or move to this solution without any optimization at all, this is what we've got. We've got 6 times faster just because there is no server in the middle. So it was really, really impressive. And I just wasn't expecting that. Now, all of this is available for you as well to test. If you just want to play around with it, we have like 95 issues to go through until we actually launch. But we still need to get some stuff done. So if you want to check it out, please go ahead and do that. To wrap up, I'm sorry for babbling a lot, but I just wanted to share a couple of things that really worked well for us. There are also a couple of things that didn't work well for us. Like, for example, we were totally underestimating the amount of effort we need. Right? So we were hoping to start to launch like in April this year, or maybe in March, and no way we could launch in March. So we launched the open beta, and now we have the open beta, whatever you want to call it, because there are still some things that we need to take care of, right? But every time you do something, at least it felt to me like this, every time I did something, it always felt like, we can't get it just right. So we're still finishing on it, but I do want to leave you with one video, which kind of defines the story of my life over the last 1.5 years. So with this in mind, I hope you enjoy it. Can we turn on the audio? sad. Right, but I've got cats and more cats. In fact, so when we're going to release very soon. And so if you find all the cats, and there are everywhere. Oh, yes, they're everywhere. We have, like, at this point, maybe 56, 58 cats. If you find all of them, you're going to get business class. You're going to get flight to any Smashing conference of your choice, plus workshop ticket, plus hotel and accommodation, plus a ticket to everything. You will not find them. I know that. They're hidden everywhere in the print style sheets. You need to, some of them are randomly chosen. You will not find them. But if you do, please come and talk to me. So with this in mind, I'm looking forward to talking to you tonight at the MailChimp Pub thing. And if you have any questions, I'm here, and meow.